Okay, back in Kerbal Space Program 2. Today the second patch has dropped, which might be the one that has my fuel ducting fixes. I have gone back to KSP-1 in the meanwhile and tried out some things. It turns out that the fuel tank priority schemes in KSP-1 were a lot more flexible than I thought, but using them to do asparagus staging will require me completely rewriting my auto-stager again. Hands up if you were surprised by this. No hands? Good. Okay. So I did a quick test to make sure that we booted, but since then I have removed all of my mods and verified all of the files, so we should be... This is still saying 0.1.2. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, patch 2. Okay. For some reason, for a moment, I thought it should have said 0.13. So 0.1.2. We have no campaigns active. So I'm going to start a new campaign. And we're just going to go in on defaults. And because I clicked through that so fast, it looks like we're going to be running tutorial stuff. Woo! Let me move my camera around a little bit. Back a little bit centered.
Your new space program, leaping forward into the cosmos. Since the dawn of Kerbal kind, we have looked to the sky and wondered what sublime mysteries lie hidden in the darkness, like jewels never beheld. These untold treasures may soon reveal themselves due to the efforts recently founded Kerbal Space.
I really just had to let that one
Oh
run.
my!
I'm going to use the pause
the
button
only
from
copy
time
of
to
the
time to skip
orientation
through
film.
some of this.
Hold on! Slides!
Okay, I really did just let that run because I like looking at it. If you want to look at it, feel free to let it run on your screen, but I didn't figure there was any need for me to record it. So we are back here at the main screen. I considered just jumping right into, can I launch my asparagus thing? I thought, wait a minute. Before testing for new things, let's go check for regressions. Let's go see, well, run through the tutorials really quick to get just the fundamentals and make sure that things are still working the way we expect. And maybe I'll fiddle around with them a little bit and see if I can find any corner cases. And yeah, Paige is going to be interrupting us a lot because all the tutorial stuff is turned on. So we'll go to the training center. I'm going to hit pause during the video sections here. These are really cute. If you haven't played through the tutorials, go do it. Even if you've got a lot of time now. Steam says I have 1,200 hours of Kerbal Space Program. Most of my time playing KSP was not in Steam, so I have no idea how many hours I have, but it has been across, over 10 years. So that could be a very large and impressive number, except that it's, like I said, spread across 10 years. So space is the place, and I'm going to do a jump cut here with a pause, as it does I think the first one's just a pure video. I will unpause when it actually has me doing something, so we can verify that all the interactions are right on the recording. So the first tutorial is just a video. Let me move myself up into a corner here. I forget which corner is actually the best one in KSP-2 for the camera. I'll just move that around. I've also moved my camera up so there's a better background. So the first tutorial, video is unchanged, at least no changes I noticed. So now we need to slop on into the next few things, which are going to be UI tutorials and such.
Welcome to the launch pad. As you embark on your journey into rocketry, it's important to get all the crashing out of your system here in the simulator. It really cuts down on the awkward phone calls. Today, you'll be launching into the virtual skies over KSC, where you'll learn how to control a rocket. Let's learn how to rotate the flight camera. That way, you can see the launch from your favorite angle. Great! You can also zoom the camera in and out. Nice! Go ahead and pick your favorite view for this launch.
Let's look from a ways away on this. So I did not get in and change any of the graphics settings, and I am not sure where I had them set up. So we may or may not be using any of AMD's FSR for this rendering. Still looks good. Moves smoothly. There's a little bit of choppiness as I scan around. It's not bad. But yeah, I can't get over this launch. So this is just makes me kind of giggle.
Your rocket is ready for launch. Every good launch starts with a big green button and lots of fire. Most bad launches do too, actually.
Okay, so we're gonna launch. So I noticed first off that no countdown.
Looking good. Ascend to 1,000 meters, and then we'll learn some controls.
I'm not sure under what conditions they do or do not do a countdown. I noticed in my flights earlier.
Okay, you're a kilometer up. You can still crash, but you'll have more time to correct your course if you start pointing at the ground. Let's learn some rocket controls.
Anyway, so I learned in my previous playthroughs, as I was working on code to do launches and such, that if I reverted to launch and then hit the launch button, it didn't do a countdown. But the first time I rolled it out, it did. So it could be it's just something that just does the first time you roll out.
When flying a rocket or a plane, we have specific terms for moving. Pitch tilts your... Nice pitch. Now pitch up until you're flying
job.
straight up. Let's move on. Yaw steers your rocket left and right. Try it now.
I'm going to wait for a moment for this to get back upright again. Notice I'm using the SAS on this. Pitch right.
Now yaw to the left to straighten up. Excellent.
Yaw left.
Now for the final control. Roll rotates your rocket clockwise and counterclockwise. Try it now.
Zoom in so you can see this. There's roll.
That's the basics of rocket flight. Feel free to experiment with the controls. We can move on when you're ready.
Okay, so that's our cluster of WASD and Q and E for attitude control. And I've been mucking with the SAS over here because I know what it does, just because I'm not very good at flying with the keyboard. So yeah, my long-term plans for KSP-2 are basically going to have to be on hold until either I can fly it with a joystick, or I can use a autopilot add-on. Control System 2 looks good. I'm hoping there will be several of them to give us a choice of what languages we want to work with. But Control System 2 looks like it'll have enough for me to do piloting. It has some good things about it. It's missing a couple of features that I'd like to have, but it's early days. I have been able to do all sorts of neat things with it so far, so it may be the way we go. Next tutorial.
So you want to get to space. It's time to make a rocket.
Ooh. Rocket construction.
A simple rocket requires 4 crucial components: a command module, fuel tank, engine, and parachute. Let's start by learning how. A command module allows us to control our vessel. As long as there is at least one command module on board, our rocket will be operational. This rocket will use a command pod, which can be manned by a Kerbal and is located in the pods category. Or multiple Kerbals. It all depends on the crew capacity of the part.
There we go.
Great! It doesn't look
I
like
jumped
much,
the
but
gun.
it's a promising start. The next thing our rocket
I'll go
needs
ahead and
is
jump the gun
how
on
about
these.
that one? Notice the part is once again. Now that's beginning to look
And
like a
launch
rocket.
engine.
Well, almost. We
Let's
need
grab
an
a swivel.
engine. Here at the
There we
KSP,
go.
we have 4 different types of engines: launcher, sustainer, orbital, and deep space engines.
This is a sustainer.
To break now, excellent. Our rocket is looking pretty great. We just need one final touch.
Parachute.
Now, all we need to. Congratulations! You've just built a rocket. Are you sure?
Yeah, nothing really earth-shaking there. They didn't have us do anything fancy. Okay.
As you start to build rockets, you'll want to see your designs
Camera.
from other angles. Let's learn how to manipulate the camera inside the vehicle assembly building. First, let's rotate the camera. Nice. Now
Okay.
let's zoom the camera in and out. Great.
That works.
Now let's pan the camera up and down. You can also focus your camera at a specific part.
Okay, the up-down pan with the middle mouse button feels awkward to me. That might just be because I'm used to middle button drag being zoom in and out inside the VAB. But in KSP-1, some of those controls were not consistent. So, we'll see. But middle clicking...
If you want to view your rocket from the top, front, or sides, switch to blueprint mode. You can change the camera's direction by selecting different sides of the view cube.
Okay, so middle mouse click to focus on something, point the camera at it, is convenient. I will probably use it more than the middle mouse button drag, which is okay because the middle mouse button drag is kind of awkward. And if there's other ways of doing things I like better, having a less awkward way of getting to them is good. So this cube here,
If you ever get lost in the VAB, you can always reset the camera.
okay, so before we do reset, so we've got this thing we can view from the back, from the right, from the front, and the left. We could switch up to the top. So we've got these, basically these 3 views. Now, I think this could benefit from having a fixed orthogonal view, say an angle like this, or you just pick a camera angle and do an orthogonal, orthographic? Anyway, a non-perspective view of the spacecraft. So it would be like a blueprint view that's not dead on from one of the axes. I find those a little more useful. So let's reset the camera with the home key.
Nice. Now you can get at those hard-to-reach parts of your rocket.
Yeah, I sometimes have extraordinarily hard to reach parts. Especially when I'm running fuel ducts around. It seems like I always have to reach into the rocket and move the fuel ducts around after I've got everything else set, which means working my way in between a bunch of tightly packed rocket stages. I saw some things in the
Your
patch
rocket's
notes
ready. Let's take it out for a little hop.
that make me believe that might be a little better. Apparently, fuel ducting and struts were disappearing from time to time. They fixed that, so maybe I'll be able to pre-duct things.
Let's move this rocket to a launch pad.
Okay, so this rocket has 2 engines and 2 decouplers and a parachute, and that looks good. Yes, I always check my staging, even in tutorials. Launch.
Welcome to the launch pad. Today, you'll be flying straight up. Your rocket should do fine without any steering inputs, but if things get out of line somehow, feel free to intervene.
Okay. So that's delaying like it's doing a countdown, but I'm not seeing, I guess that 4 is the number of stages. And I'm not hearing the countdown in my ears. So I didn't hear the countdown, and if you put anything on the screen, I missed it.
You've cleared the launch tower and your flight is underway. Let's learn about staging. Rockets are constructed in sections called stages. Each stage is designed for a different part of a mission. When a stage completes its job, it's dropped to shed weight. On your right, you'll find the staging stack. It displays all of the functions contained in each stage. Every time you select the Go button, you'll activate a new stage, starting from the bottom of the stack.
Now, I really wish that they numbered the stages starting from the top of the stack. So I'm used to thinking of this as stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So this could be confusing. It all depends on how those show up inside the add-on. I think inside the add-on, if you print the stage number, it counts from 0 at the top. But that's something we will be re-verifying repeatedly as we play the game.
Each stage's fuel supply is shown on a bar next to the stage. Your active stage, stage 1, still has a little fuel in it. When it goes dry, you'll drop that stage by selecting Go.
Now we're going to be focusing a lot on these as we start working on the asparagus stuff, because those weren't working right.
Your first stage is out of fuel, and all it is doing is slowing you down. To drop that weight, you're going to activate your next stage. That will activate a decoupler, which will drop your empty stage. It will also activate your next engine. Once you activate a stage, there's no going back.
Okay, she interrupted as I was telling a lie. So these fuel displays in Asparagus, it's not that they weren't correct, it's they were reflecting the reality that the fuel was not flowing where I expected it to flow. And that is the big change I was looking for in this patch. We'll get there.
Ready? Hit Go to lose that mass.
Boop.
Congratulations! You're nearly to space, and your next set of fuel tanks are empty. Now is a good time to drop them.
Okay, she said we're nearly to space. We're actually only 12,000 meters, and our apoapsis is still only 45,000 meters, and space is 70. So near is a relative term. There's also the problem that orbit is not high, orbit is fast. And we're about a third the speed we need to be in orbit. Just bear that in mind. So she says, time to drop these tanks.
Activate the next. Your capsule will now continue coasting up. All that's left to do is gaze back down at Kerbin and wonder if you remembered to lock your car. Nice work!
I do like the new KSC. And I've been running Kerbal Space Program 1 fairly modified, and it looks good. This looks at least as good, and this is without mods. So what are we going to do in the next tutorial? I don't know. You suppose they're going to have us do a gravity turn at some point?
Your capsule has a lot of momentum. If you're curious how high up you are, take a look at your altimeter. You're so high that you can see the curve of the horizon.
Yeah, this is what I was just mentioning. Altimeter over here, orbital parameters, apoapsis and periapsis. Apoapsis says, if we continued along our current trajectory, this is the highest we would get. And if it were in orbit, periapsis is the altitude that we come down to before going back up. Well, negative number says that our orbit, quote unquote, is underground. And 600,000 meters, 600 kilometers, 600 kilometers is center of Kerbin. So this says we are on basically a rectilinear, or we're going straight up and straight down. Not quite rectilinear because it wouldn't go all the way down to 600K, but very close.
Rocketry involves a lot of waiting between the cool explosions. You can speed up time by selecting the time warp controls at the bottom of your screen. Check out your altimeter. See how quickly those numbers are rising? Let's ride the rest of the way up and fast forward.
I'm going to be interested in finding out how time warp works in multiplayer.
You're about to start falling back down. Let's slow down and enjoy the view. Great job. You're now a master of time. Try not to use this new power for evil.
Now, I have heard something about timelines where each player will be doing this independently, but when they come together, they will have to sync up somehow. And be interesting to find out about that. So, for instance, if a couple of us wanted to independently launch and get into orbit and then rendezvous, what happens if we're like 80 degrees apart in orbit? You know, does the fact that one person did a time warp and the other one didn't, if we were in the same orbit, are we in different places along the orbit? Do we somehow just have one person stall until the other ones catch up with them in their time, or what? Anyway, interested to see how they resolve that. Now, if the orbits are actually held in their parameters, you know, including things like mean anomaly at epoch and the time of the epoch, it means that they do get reconciled somehow. Interesting to find out how. Okay, so time warping. I guess the next thing is going to be gravity turns, I hope. Or at least the concept of turning.
What goes
Nope.
up must come down.
Landing first.
Wind resistance will slow down your capsule's descent, but not enough to prevent it from turning into a bunch of tiny capsules when it lands. That's why we've attached a parachute.
Now, we are actually in the speed and altitude range where in KSP-1 I would go ahead and pop the parachute immediately.
If you deploy your parachute too early, it'll be torn off. If you deploy it too late, you'll do some unplanned underground exploration. The sweet spot for Kerbin is between 20,000 and 2,000 meters.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
Okay, you're low enough to activate the final stage that contains your parachute. Hit go to pop your chute.
There we go.
Nice work. The parachute will trail your capsule for a bit without fully opening. Once you've slowed down enough, it'll open all the way by itself.
So let's continue on this. So here's the parachute information where you right click on it.
Your parachute is now fully deployed and slowing the capsule to a safe velocity. Congratulations! If this were real, you'd find celebratory snacks in the VAB kitchen.
Okay, so you can tune the chute for the minimum pressure and the deploy altitude. That's good. It's got a cut button. I'm not sure what, I guess this is the chute safety display. So yeah, we never got into a flight regime where it wouldn't have been safe to pop the chute. Okay, so now we know how to go up, and we know how to come down, and we know how to land. Now can we get a turn?
What goes up must come down.
I
Wind
hit
resistance
replay.
will slow down your capsule's
on.
descent,
Let me get
but not enough
out
to
of
prevent.
this. Okay, this time without a misclick. End tutorial. I probably should have looked at the list of tutorial steps. Okay, so that's space, missing the ground. Okay, so missing the ground would be getting into orbit, and then orbits are weird as orbital. Yeah, okay, so they've got these organized. Missing the ground is decouplers and merging workspaces and radial boosters. This is all building things and staging and gravity turn and establishing orbit. So this gets us up to orbit. This first one is just a video. I will pause while it plays. Okay, that is a cute little video on missing the ground, being how they are a model for getting into orbit. Basically, you're still falling, but you're going sideways so fast that by the time you get down to where the ground is, it's not there anymore.
When you're making a rocket, it's often easiest to work top to bottom, tailoring each stage to carry the weight of everything above it. To give you a head start, I've already placed an upper stage, perfect for maneuvering in the vacuum of space. It could use another, more powerful stage to push it up to space from Kerbin's surface. Let's turn this vehicle into a multi-stage rocket.
Okay.
Anytime we intend to drop an empty stage after using all of its fuel, we connect it to the stage above it using a decoupler. A decoupler contains explosive bolts that, when activated by a staging action, eject the attached stage away from the rest of the vehicle. Add that decoupler to the bottom of your rocket. We need to attach a larger, more powerful lower stage to the bottom of your rocket. To keep things simple, I've whipped up a new lower stage in another workspace. You can bring saved vehicles and other sub-assemblies into an in-progress workspace by merging it. Let's merge my lower stage into this VAB workspace.
So when I added this decoupler, it added this new staging item down at the bottom, but it didn't place the decoupler into it. That's different. I wonder, as we add things onto the bottom, when it does. Anyway, let's follow along their workspace merge thing.
Out in the real world, this list would show all of your saved workspaces. Here in the simulator, I'm only showing you the lower stage you need to merge.
Okay.
Now that the lower stage has been merged into your current workspace, you can see it next to the upper stage. Select the lower stage and connect it to the decoupler beneath the upper stage to create a single two-stage rocket. Perfect! Merging is a very powerful tool. Anytime you want to reuse a particular booster, lander, or other element from an existing rocket, merging saves you the hassle of making the same thing over and over.
So now, this upper the upper one is invisible. The lower one is visible. The engine there is visible, and there should be one more engine down here. This engine is not on the staging. And notice when I put it there, something appeared here. So something is weird in the staging as I merged this in. And it's not letting me add something below this stage. something is wonky with the staging display in this particular tutorial, and it was wonky before we did the workspace merge. I'm wondering if they were hiding things during that process because we haven't covered them yet in tutorials. We will see as we start to build up our eventual test rocket.
Space rockets sometimes need an extra boost. In a rare case of rocket scientists naming something well, these additional rocket engines are called boosters. Boosters are attached to the sides of a vehicle to keep them out of the way of the main engines. Solid fuel rockets make great boosters. They produce a very high thrust for a short time. Let's attach some boosters to the sides of your vehicle.
Okay.
We'll start by attaching 4 radial decouplers that will eject the spent boosters when they're empty. To make sure that these decouplers are evenly spaced and aligned with one another, you'll be using the symmetry tool.
So, must say that I do like the fact that I can right-click on this and pick my symmetry. And we've integrated the radials 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 here together with the only other one, which was the mirror symmetry. Anyway, let's follow the
Great!
tutorial.
Now when you place a part on one side of your rocket, 3 more evenly spaced duplicates will appear around the rocket. Go ahead and add 4 radial decouplers.
4 radial decouplers. There we go. Just drop it right in there like that. Right in the middle of that purple blob.
Perfect! Now you've got 4 radial decouplers exactly where they need to be.
And I'm noticing that when I highlight stage 1 here, it's highlighting those decouplers, but it's not showing the icon for them. That's beginning to get disturbing.
Let's attach those solid fuel boosters.
Okay, so there's the solid fuel boosters.
Since you're still in 4x symmetry mode, simply attach this booster to one of the decouplers you just placed. That will attach copies of that booster to the remaining decouplers.
Okay, got that kind of lined up.
Great job! You've finished your orbital rocket. You can symmetrically place up to 8 parts at once, a feat that could until now only be achieved by certain sea creatures.
So, the fact that these engines and the decoupler are not showing on the staging meter is kind of disturbing. Okay, let's go check out the next tutorial.
Before you launch a rocket, you need to plan the order of your staging events. Nobody wants to start out their flight by popping their parachute, right? Most parts that can be staged are automatically assigned to stages. Their activation order can be seen in the staging stack. You can change when staging events occur by moving them between stages. You can also add, remove, and reorder stages. Best of all, you can do this in both the VAB and in flight.
Okay, so now we have everything set up. All the icons are there.
The staging order begins at the bottom of the staging stack. You want your boosters and main engine to fire together for maximum thrust. The solid fuel boosters are currently in the second stage. If we don't change anything, the boosters will ignite late and detach themselves at the same time. This would be embarrassing for everybody, so let's move the boosters down to stage 1. Your solid fuel boosters burn very hard and very fast. so they will run out of fuel first. Even though your main engine and boosters will activate at the same time, you want to drop the empty boosters before you drop your main engine. You'll add a new stage above stage 1 to do one thing. Activate the radial decouplers to jettison your spent boosters. Now move all 4 radial decouplers from stage 4 to your new stage 2. All done. Your remaining stages are set up so that stage 4 will activate your orbital stage's engine. Stage 5 will detach the orbital stage's fuel tank when it's empty. And stage 6 will deploy your landing parachute. Thanks to you, this rocket is ready to fly.
So, I've complained before, kind of mumbling about Delta V not updating. When we moved our decouplers here down, we now do see, here's the Delta V we'll get in stage 1, and then once we have exhausted our boosters, we still have this much left in stage 2. That's fine, but where's our Delta V for this stage? And why did that just go away? And why can't I put that in the same stage as this? So there is something systemically wrong with this display. Items are disappearing from it, and the Delta V is still being listed out as 0. I'm beginning to shake my head. Some of these are disturbing. Going to make it a little difficult to carefully plan out and build a rocket. I'm hoping that
we're ready
as
to
we
light this candle. In this flight, you're going all the way to orbit. I'll walk you through the process of launching, executing a gravity turn to get moving sideways, coasting to orbital altitude, and doing a final burn at the top of your arc to establish a stable orbit.
So what I'm hoping is that as we do our development, we can do a quick save, quick load, and in the quick load process, it will go ahead and refigure all of that display information and get that back to us. But that's still only a workaround. Kind of needs to be fixed, and if it's not a tutorial thing, I'll see if I can reproduce it. I may uninstall and reinstall from scratch to make absolutely clear that I've got nothing left over from any previous mods here. Anyway, I'll file that as a bug because the staging display really needs to work, and the display of the Delta V at each stage really needs to work and be updated. We can't have icons disappearing. It makes it very hard to configure your rocket and get the staging right before you launch. So we're all set here. They have removed half the fuel from each of the solid rocket boosters. So we only have 890 Delta V. It does show numbers here, so once we've done the 890, we'll have 923 left in the liquid fuel here, and 932 left here, and that's good. Will this get us to orbit? Maybe. Should get us close.
Before we begin, let's talk about the nav ball. The nav ball shows your vehicle's orientation relative to the horizon. The blue half of the ball represents the sky, and the brown half represents the ground. The level indicator at the center shows your vehicle's orientation. When you turn, the ball turns. When you roll, the ball rolls. Assuming you want your rocket pointed at the sky, you'll want to see lots of blue on the nav ball. If you get confused, remember this rhyme. If the nav ball's brown, you're going down. At launch, you want all your engines at maximum thrust, which means you need to set your throttle at 100%. Your solid fuel boosters are way ahead of you on this. They have no setting other than full throttle, and they can't be shut off once they're lit. Once you hit the go button, They'll go full tilt until they run out of fuel. Still, your main engine's throttle is in your control. You can see your main throttle here. Left shift gradually increases your throttle. Left control gradually decreases your throttle. Z and X instantly set your throttle to 100 or 0% respectively. Left click on the throttle will set your fuel levels are visible within the staging stack. Right now you can see that your main engine and 4 boosters are all topped off and ready to rumble. It's time to go. At the start, all you need to do is fly straight up. I'll check back in with you once those boosters are empty. Good luck!
Okay, so straight up. Making use of SAS.
All right, the solid fuel boosters are empty. It's time to start your gravity turn. A gravity turn uses the pull of the planet's gravity to help bend your vertical ascent into a horizontal arc. It's the first step to entering orbit. For our first flight to orbit, we're going to start our gravity turn up to where the air is thin, at an altitude of around 10,000 meters. To show you where to aim your rocket, I've placed a target marker on your nav ball.
Okay, I staged late on that, so I'm going to have to delay my pitch a little bit, get those engines out of the way, but then I'll pitch over.
First, we need to get to 10,000 meters.
Okay, so I have matched the marker on my
You're
nav
going
ball.
to yaw towards the east so that the target marker is in the center of the nav ball. Your vessel and nav ball should look like this example video if you're performing the gravity turn correctly.
Okay, the whole straight up to 10,000 meters and then slam it over to 45 and hope for the best used to be the correct way to do it before KSP had any kind of atmospheric model. If you do it with an atmospheric model in place, that rotation that they're showing right there on the screen, you're getting a lot of side forces from the aerodynamics because you have an angle of attack that's huge. That's the difference between your prograde vector and your pointing vector. That's surface prograde in this case. And that huge angle of attack makes it harder to maintain control. So it'll be a more advanced thing, but they will talk about starting your turn lower and making it more gradual. Just for reference, the automatic turns that I do start almost as soon as the spacecraft has cleared the gantry, and you pitch over and you're maintaining just a few degrees difference between your flight path and where you're pointed.
Way to make Kerbin's gravity work for you. You're now on track
Okay.
to establish an orbit.
So I'm going to have SAS correct me to prograde. I will just tap
Your
it now
current
and then.
stage's fuel is empty. Let's drop. Great job. Your rocket is on its way to orbit. As you gain experience, you can make your gravity turns more efficient by starting to tilt your rocket soon after liftoff. Adjusting course with a series of small corrections instead of one big one will leave you with a lot more fuel when you get to orbit. Turning immediately after launch requires a very stable rocket. So if you ever have trouble keeping the pointy end up, you can try the simplified wait and turn method we use today.
So I'm having trouble controlling this because it's just a tap on the keyboard is causing it to do. Oh, we are actually high enough. $78K, $79K. Okay, there we go. So we ended up with 1,000 meters per second of delta V when I throttled down with our apoapsis at 80 kilometers. That's pretty good. So one of the reasons why the delta V numbers were a little low there, what we're looking at is sea level delta V, and these engines that
Right now, we're on a ballistic trajectory. If no further adjustments are made, your rocket will eventually fall back down to the ground. Our objective is to turn this arc into an orbit. The process of turning your trajectory into a circular orbit is called circularization. Partial credit to the rocket people on that one. It does have the word circle in it, but it's really hard to say.
Okay, so the delta V numbers being weird, if I can continue from where I left off, we were seeing sea level delta V. And you'll notice that this engine, little short stubby thing, this is the LV909. It's an orbital engine. It's much, much, much more effective on orbit. So at sea level, it might show up as only having 800 or 900 meters per second of delta V, and yet we get up on orbit and just this much fuel has more like 1,000 meters per second of delta V, and even more than that. When you're planning out your rocket, you're looking at your delta V. For the upper stages, you're going to want to look at the vacuum delta V of the engine rather than the sea level delta V. And I'm hoping they will cover how to switch that up in this display in the VAB so we can take a look at that. If not, we'll just experiment with it as we build. So, circularization.
When planning and executing orbital maneuvers, you'll want to switch to map view, where you can see every part of your current trajectory.
So, first thing I notice here before I go to map view is we are currently at 153 kilometers of altitude. The atmospheric Kerbin goes up to 70 kilometers, so we're way higher than I would normally establish a low Kerbin orbit.
The blue arc passing through your vehicle is its current trajectory, the path your rocket will follow if you don't touch the controls anymore. Our goal is to make that arc into a circular orbit. After you've coasted nearly to the top of this arc, you're going to point forward, and then you're going to ignite your engine. If you time this burn right, you'll never quite get to the top of the arc, as it'll keep widening in front of you until it wraps all the way around the planet.
Yep. So starting from higher means we have more time to mess around and learn. That's good. I tend to try for orbits around 80 kilometers. It gives us 10 kilometers above the atmosphere to work with, which is more than enough once you've got the hang of it.
Let's break that down a little more. The top of your arc has a helpful tag in map view. It's called the apoapsis, abbreviated as AP. You're going to max out your throttle before you pass this point. We're paused at just before the apoapsis. We want to go faster in the direction we're already moving, so we need to make sure our rocket is pointed forward. There's a handy marker on your nav ball called the prograde marker. That represents your forward direction. Use the Stability Assist System, or SAS, to point your vessel at that marker.
I've been messing with this all through these. I'm glad they're finally getting around to teaching us about them.
You're all lined up and ready to go. The next step is to go max throttle. It can take time for your arc to fully expand into an orbit. Once your trajectory reaches all the way around the planet, you'll see another marker on your orbit. This is the periapsis, or PE, the lowest point in your orbit. It'll always live on the opposite side of your orbit from the apoapsis, or highest point. By burning prograde near your apoapsis, you increase the altitude of your periapsis, the lowest point on your orbit.
So it came out of pause there and didn't say anything, but we have been burning. And you notice that our orbit is growing.
Here's the most important thing to remember about setting up an orbit above an atmosphere. Your periapsis must be higher than the atmosphere, or your rocket will start to slow down every time it dips into the upper atmosphere. On Kerbin, that means every part of your orbit must be higher than 70 kilometers.
Now I'm feathering the throttle back to try to keep our time here to apoapsis at around 30 seconds. So our apoapsis doesn't get too far ahead of us. This also means that it won't get too far above us, and we'll spend less energy total getting into our circular orbit, because we'll end up with a circular orbit that's lower, so thus lower energy. You can't always balance it on a constant ETA at apoapsis. But you can get pretty close, and you don't really need to rush this burn. If you try to burn heavy and circularize, you'll end up pushing your apoapsis way out, and your periapsis will still be catching up with you. So I like to keep this fairly low, 27. Let's bring this down to 20 seconds. So we're just nearly at our... So as we get down lower...
Okay, your orbit is fully out of the You did it! You're in orbit! This is when I'd usually tell you to look under your seat in the simulator, where you'd find a delicious celebratory treat. Sadly, since the vending machine in the astrodynamics lab broke down, it has gotten very difficult to hide snacks anywhere at KSC. Feel free to take a moment to admire your first orbit. In a way, you've given yourself a mind snack, which is way better than the edible kind anyway. Right? Right?
Okay, just polishing up the orbit here while she's talking. I'm holding it 15 seconds from apoapsis roughly. And my periapsis is very close. So we are going to get a nice, oh, there we go. And it begins to get away from me just as it creeps up. I can touch it a little bit here and there. But now if you do more than a touch of thrust, it is really going to push that apoapsis away from you, because you're almost entirely circular here. There we go. Close enough. Now, in theory, I could just put this... Oop, okay, so that little bit of a blip was enough to flip them as my far side of my orbit went just above my near side. But you'll notice that we are still only 600 meters difference. So this is a really good circular orbit. The key thing is to throttle down and do the last bits of that circularization at very low throttle. Keep a really good eye on it, or use an automated system that can keep a really good eye on it at higher throttles. And that gets us into orbit. I'm going to take a short break here, refill my drink. No, I'm not.
If no further adjustments are made, your rocket will eventually fall back down to the ground. Our objective is to turn this arc into an orbit. The process of turning your trajectory into a circular orbit is called circularization. Partial credit to the rocket people on that one. It does have the word circle in it, but it's really hard to say.
Okay, so I made a mistake and I hit replay, so we're going to put this on pause, and I'll come back once I have gotten through this the second time. I totally didn't do that because I just have fun. Okay, back. So the next thing, I believe, is orbits are weird, where they're going to cover how to expand to a higher orbit and electrical charge and deorbiting. And that's going to start off with a video, which I'm not going to record. Okay, some good information. Although their piece of wisdom about whatever you do at this side of your orbit affects the opposite part. Well, that's only true for prograde and retrograde.
An equatorial orbit is good, but if you want to travel beyond Kerbin, you will need to manipulate your orbit. Let's start with something simple, expanding an orbit. We do that by increasing the value of our apoapsis. Let's get a good view.
Okay, I really ought to talk and then let it advance rather than advancing it and trying to say something. So, yeah, the lesson from the video was the burns that you do prograde now are going to affect the opposite side of your orbit. But I'd like to note that if you have any radial burn, or it's upwards instead of forwards, or any normal burn off to the side, what that really affects is the part of your orbit 90 degrees around from you. So if you burn to the side, that changes your orbital inclination. It rotates the orbital plane, and the point that's 180 degrees around doesn't move because you're changing the orbital plane. Let's see if I can. You're doing this to it. So we're going around in this circle, and all you're doing is you're doing this. So some of your burns affect 180 degrees around. Other parts affect 90 degrees around. Oh, and Control System 2 has had a new release, no doubt, to catch up with the patch. Well, that'll be good to know when we are done with this and we've figured out what's going on and I can go back to doing my scripting stuff. So equatorial orbit is good, and they're going to talk about increasing the value of the apoapsis. So we want to get to map view.
Remember how you circularized your orbit by increasing your forward velocity? To raise your orbit, you'll just do more of the same. It's time to burn prograde.
Okay, so prograde on the SAS.
Now that we're pointed the right way, we can increase the throttle and watch our orbit expand.
Okay.
Ooh,
How
cut the
far are we
throttle.
going?
If you overdo it, you'll leave Kerbin's orbit entirely. Nice. That maneuver raised our orbit on the other side of Kerbin, so we will enter high orbit there. Waiting to reach a specific point can be as eventful as watching the neon stripes on your rover dry. The paint job will be worth it, but isn't it better to rush to the end? Skip ahead to the good stuff using a time warp.
Okay. Just for reference, the high orbit they're talking about here is 300 kilometers. Not especially high. It'll do. So, time warp.
Like I said earlier, the highest point of our orbit is called the apoapsis. The lowest point of our orbit is known as the periapsis. By default, your camera is focused on your vessel, so if you can't see either of these points, adjust your camera.
Oh, and as far as leaving Kerbin is concerned, KSP-2 is very helpful. It not only shows you the orbits of things, but it also shows you their sphere of influence. And if we zoom out, we can see Mun here and Minmus here with their spheres of influence. And this is the sphere of influence of Kerbin. Basically, if you were doing a full physical simulation, inside the sphere of influence is where the best approximation of your orbit is orbiting Kerbin perturbed by other things, and outside it's orbiting other things perturbed by Kerbin. So the sphere of influence in real physical terms is kind of a fuzzy area. There is a point you can pick where you're moving from one side of the balance to the other, but there's no real sharp cutoff. In Kerbal Space Program, there is a very sharp cutoff in that if you are inside that, then KSP computes your orbit as if the only gravity acting on you is from Kerbin. So for instance, if we leave this line, instead of being in orbit around Kerbin, we are now in orbit around the sun, and we're going to be following along with Kerbin merely because our orbit is similar to it.
Scroll the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Double-click an object to center your camera on it. Click the middle mouse button to enter FreeCam. Press Home to reset the camera to your active vessel.
This is consistent with the VAB in that middle mouse button. Well, it's FreeCam rather than just being up and down. Oh, and there's a spot in the middle of the screen here showing what I am aiming at. Well, that's convenient. And we can double click on something. It's too bad we can't just middle click on something to focus on. That would be consistent. So double click, I've now focused on Kerbin. And home gets us back here. Okay, select the apoapsis icon.
Excellent! You can time warp to any position on your trajectory by selecting a point on your vehicle's current path, and then selecting Time Warp to Point.
Boom. Time warp.
Now you're way up in the sky, so high that if you circularize your orbit now, you'll be in high orbit. Wow, the black starry void looks so small from here.
Okay. So they're not going to actually have us circularize our orbit because we've already done that exercise. Let's go on.
From command pods to space probe cores, a lot of critical rocket parts use electric charge. You'll want to design your rocket so it can generate and store EC.
Okay, you'll notice well, they're going to talk about that, I guess. I don't need to point it out.
Most rocket engines generate electric charge while active, but we'll still need a way to keep our batteries full while coasting between maneuvers. Solar panels convert Kerbal's light into EC for our rockets. Small solar panels can just be placed, but large solar panels are delicate and must only be deployed once we're out of the atmosphere. I've equipped this rocket with 2 deployable solar panels. Here's a hand crank. Get to work. Just kidding. There's a handy button that opens all of them with a single click. Give it a try. Great.
Nice.
The solar panels are now extended. Light-tracking solar panels only rotate on one axis, so we may need to reorient our ship to point them fully at the sun. Let's make sure the panels are getting direct sunlight by rolling our ship a little bit. Excellent. The solar panels are soaking up all of those sweet photons and giving our rocket some much-needed EC. You can see the status of any solar panel within the Part Manager in the Electrical Parts menu. You can either access the app directly by clicking the app button, or you can right-click a part to directly access it in the Part Manager.
Okay, there's the Part Manager. I clicked on one of these solar panels, so we're extended. And we got a solar exposure. If I roll the craft, notice as we narrow down the angle, the exposure goes down. And we could, in fact, retract and extend the panels here.
Getting EC is one thing, and storing it is another. Most command pods have a small battery, but many missions will call for additional EC storage. When we're traveling far from the sun or going to the dark side of a planet, more batteries means more peace of mind.
Or you can spend a lot of time working out your energy draws and your energy charging rates and how long you're going to be in the shadow, and you can actually compute how much battery you need. And then you double it because it's never right. Next tutorial.
At some point, the crew will run out of snacks. Did you know a Kerbal is 99.9% more likely to crash when hungry? That's when it's time to head back down to Kerbin, a planet known for its plentiful snack options. First, let's get a better view for this operation. Remember how we burned prograde to raise our orbit? To lower our orbit, we burn in the opposite direction, retrograde. SAS can really help us out here, so let's turn that on. Now flip retrograde, the opposite direction to our rocket's movement. When we get into position to fire our engine backwards, we'll slow down. All right, the rocket is aligned to retrograde. Increase the throttle and burn until our trajectory is just past the atmosphere. As we decelerate, watch what's happening to our periapsis. Once it enters the atmosphere, this rocket is on a path back to the ground. Don't ease off the throttle yet, though. We're gonna keep burning until our trajectory intercepts the ground. This should give us a good idea where our capsule will land.
So they think it's a good idea to drive it all the way into the ground rather than do an aerobraking pass that's nice and high first. That's fine. We'll do that. Now, once we get our periapsis down to like 35 kilometers, it's been my experience that you slow down enough getting down to 35 that it actually brings you all the way down into the ground. But let's go ahead and satisfy their condition of having a negative periapsis, which means below the ground. There we go.
Now that we're on a collision course with Kerbin, we need to turn that collision into something more survivable. This process of crashing without dying is called landing. Our upcoming stage will activate a decoupler, dropping the engine and exposing a very important heat shield. Why don't you do that now? Great. We're on our way down and our heat shield is exposed. Have you ever wondered what a marshmallow feels like when it catches on fire? You're about to find out.
So my preferred approach is to do an aerobraking pass higher up in the orbit and to try to balance things out so that the aerobraking pass brings our apoapsis down inside the atmosphere. Once we've gotten there, that's our minimum amount of energy we can have in the atmosphere, is to have nothing poking up out of it. So that means that we are moving as slowly as we could move at that point. Beyond that, we can slow down in the atmosphere, let the atmosphere break us. We can slow down with our engines, doesn't matter. But getting down to that point before we get further down in the atmosphere is good. If you find yourself down in the lower half of the atmosphere and your apoapsis is way up outside, it means you're moving really fast, you're getting really hot, you tend to burn off things like your landing legs, which you need to land most of the time. Okay, orbital transfers is next. There's going to be a video, which I'm not going to record. There's going to be planning a maneuver to get from Kerbin to Mun and executing the plan and doing a capture. So this will be their maneuver node introduction, which is really great. I love these because this is the cornerstone of all the automation, is figuring out, I want to burn this much at this time in the future to transition to this other orbit. You get yourself in that mindset, and that gets you your orbital stuff. That gets you your automation. Side note, about 20 years ago-ish, I was working at NASA Ames as a software engineer on a project which used a simulator that looked something like this, maybe a little bit smaller. Class 5 simulator for 747, which had been refitted so we could use it to simulate other similar craft. Although I think this particular drawing, this particular artwork is more based on the simulator that was used at NASA Ames for the space shuttle. Although I think the one that was space shuttle had a lot more vertical throw available to it. So this is kind of a cross between the two. But these are really super cool to work with. They can really throw you around good inside. And yeah, when you're running into one of those, when you're running a simulation on one of those, there are people with their hand above switches. That's the cutoff, because if something goes wrong with the hydraulics, you do not want to have it go wild. You want it to just settle back down onto its haunches. We want it to sit back down so you can get out of there, because they can throw you around really good. Okay, so let's start this up. I'm not going to record their orbital transfers video, but we'll do the rest of it. Okay, so they covered the basic idea of transferring to Mun. Built into their excitement was, if you don't slow down, you'll get thrown off into outer space somewhere. And that's because the orbit they were showing shows you going past Mun on a prograde orbit. Now, if you choose slightly differently in your approach, you can go on a trajectory that if you didn't burn near Mun, you would still get back to Kerbin. And in fact, you can set it up so that you get back lower. It's called a free return trajectory, and the Apollo program used these. So one way of doing this is to arrange that when you arrive at Mun, you're going around the backside in the reverse direction, in retrograde. The critical part of this is to arrange it so that while you are being pulled at by Mun, it is reducing your orbital energy around Kerbin. So you want to fly past the front of Mun to get it to reduce that orbital energy so that you come back slower. It's also possible to do a flyby that just barely nips the inner edge of Kerbin's SOI. And depending on how you bias that, you may come back on almost the same orbit, or a similar orbit that has the same periapsis, or a similar orbit with a slightly lower periapsis. So there's a lot of things you can do to prevent their slingshot past Mun. But yeah, if you just, if you aim for getting close to Mun and you do it wrong in the most simple way possible, you can end up leaving Kerbin's SOI very unexpectedly. Now, with maneuver nodes, we'll be able to see that, and we can actually mess with maneuver nodes a bit. I hope we can do that during the tutorial. If not, we can do it after the tutorial, or
Our
the first time we
rocket
get
is
in
in orbit
flight.
over Kerbin and ready to fly. The mission today is to, drumroll please, intercept and orbit the Mun. To be captured by the Mun's gravity, our vessel must cross into the Mun's sphere of influence, or SOI, the zone in which its gravity is stronger than any other celestial body around it. We're going to create a maneuver plan to figure out when and how long we need to fire our engines to intercept the Mun. Great! Now here's a new trick. We can select any object as a target in map view. Targeting gives us useful information and enables new tools. Once we've targeted a celestial body or other object in space, our maneuver will provide closest pass and plane angle information. This can be very helpful for meeting up with someone or something in space. Right now, our camera is following our vessel as it orbits Kerbin. Let's adjust our camera until we can see the Mun. Then, right-click to target it. We want to place this maneuver plan with two things in mind. First, the Mun is in motion. We can't aim our spacecraft where the Mun is right now. Instead, we have to aim where the Mun will be after our vehicle has coasted all the way from Kerbin. Second, remember how increasing velocity raises the opposite side of our orbit? Since we're placing this maneuver plan where we intend to start our burn, we should place it on the opposite side of Kerbin from where we intend to intercept the Mun. Placing a maneuver plan usually involves making a best guess, and then fiddling with the maneuver until you get an intercept. Fortunately, you've got a crack navigator with you today. By my calculations, we'll want to put our maneuver here. Excellent! We've just created a maneuver plan. While we could find out if our departure timing is correct by just picking a direction and maxing the throttle, a maneuver plan tells us in advance how much delta V we'll need, how long we'll need to burn, and in what direction our vessel will need to point during the maneuver. Grab and pull the arrows to plan a burn along that direction. This maneuver is pretty simple. We want to burn prograde and expand our orbit. Nice! That maneuver event towards the end of your trajectory is exactly what we're looking for. It tells that if we execute this plan, we'll intercept the Mun.
Okay, so here's our new. So we were in this orbit. We're going to burn, putting us in this orbit. And at this point, We see the new icon for entering an SOI. We see over here a depiction of the SOI of MUN. And here's where we enter it, and here's where we exit it. And this is going to happen with MUN here. So this is the angle. This will transform. This isn't. This doesn't rotate. This display doesn't rotate as we go around. So it really is going to be in that direction, but it's going to be over here. So I'm going to tune the orbit back a little bit. And you notice if we just barely tip into the SOI, now we go down and look at where we are here. You notice that if we just barely tip into the SOI, it just barely changes our orbit. And the longer we spend, now we are about half and half. We're not changing our orbital energy a whole lot, but we are offsetting it. But as we get further in, you'll notice that we are raising our periapsis significantly. And as we burn harder and harder, we are going to be entering MUN's SOI on a steeper and steeper hyperbolic orbit. So if we really fling at it, we're not getting close enough really to cause damage. So the starting, I'm not going to move the timing of the maneuver node, but if you move the timing of the maneuver node much, you can get your MUN periapsis down very low, and it'll really swing you out there. So basically, it'll kink your orbit over. This is a hyperbolic orbit past MUN, and if you can get that angle to be even sharper, the more it bends you, the more orbital energy you're picking up from MUN. And you notice at that point, boom. And there's an orbit where we are headed out of Kerbin's SOI. But let's leash that back in. What I'm going to leave it at is an orbit where the return orbit happens to be tangent to MUN's orbit. So it's going to capture us once and release us. And once it's released us, our apoapsis is going to be about the MUN's distance, and our periapsis is going to be this nice low value here. This is good.
If a maneuver looks right, but we're not getting the intercept we expect, we can change the starting position of the maneuver by grabbing and dragging the middle of the maneuver plan along our orbit. It's very common to refine a maneuver plan by adjusting both the position of the maneuver and the direction of the planned burn.
Now, is it going to let us do that?
If we don't want to maneuver at all, we can delete the plan, either by right-clicking the gizmo and selecting delete, or through the burn timer.
Okay, so there's a delete button there.
Maneuvers are invaluable when leaving Kerbin. Feel free to come back and practice anytime.
So let's mess with this a bit. I was talking about the retrograde orbit. Now, the Apollo orbits, what they would do, if I remember the orbit right, is you ended up swinging out here, but instead of, instead of entering MUN's SOI here, they would delay it. They would bring us, oh, come on, further out that way. What I'm going to do is look for a transfer that is retrograde around MUN. Let's see. Let's start by getting us out past the MUN's orbit, just like that. There we go. So this is actually a retrograde orbit around Mun, and we're going to leash this in just a little bit. Well, okay, there we go. So now, notice our trajectory as seen here from Kerbin is we're going to go out. We're going to here, we're going to get our apophysis as we come back. Here we'll be swept up, and we will swing by the front side. So this is actually a retrograde orbit that swings by the front side of Mun. So it's going from here to there. That's not really the orbit I was looking for. I wanted to get an orbit where we're going around the back side. Let's see if I can do that. I'm focused on looking at our orbit around Mun. There we go. That's the orbit I was looking for. And we're just going to tweak this. I probably don't have the launch timing right. You tweak this until your periaps comes back down. Yeah, I think I didn't have the timing right. This gives you the feel for what I was looking for. At this point, we would do a computerized search of our orbits, looking for the minimum energy orbit that got us onto a trajectory like this, where we enter Mun's SOI and go around the back and come back down. And we can scan it back and forth a little bit like this. And I think here's an orbit where we're just barely touching the SOI of Mun out here. Now our dwell time, this is going to be moving very slowly, so this gives us a small window of opportunity to decide that we want to orbit Mun. And if we don't do that, then we wander back out here and we come back in and we are back to our return trajectory. So what if I decrease our energy? We continue to decrease energy and adjust the time. My goodness, I am kind of manually doing a hill climb here where I'm trying to reduce the burn. And as long as my reduction of the burn raises my periapsis, I can then change our, okay, this is the orbit we would be looking for then. So this is a fairly early burn time, a fairly small burn, because I kept reducing the size of it. And we end up on this orbit, which goes out here. And the display is a little confused. See if I can get, that separates the icons. So we end up following this trajectory out toward Mun. We enter the SOI here, and that's at the closest part. And we have just enough energy that we are looping around the back of Mun. And that's this little thing. And it looks like it goes in the opposite direction here a little bit, because it does. We are being swung around Mun, and then we come back out here, and that puts us on this orbit, which still goes out past Mun, but the periapsis, when we come back in, we can tune that. If I reduced our energy further, it would go out. If we burn a little bit harder, I can bring our periapsis down to where if we didn't do anything, we would come back and aerobrake. And this is the kind of orbit that Apollo used. The idea would be that if something went wrong on this outbound leg, our astronauts would still come back. Now, they did a lot more tuning because they were sensitive on what angles they came in at. They had to hit a fairly narrow window, but they didn't just, do it by hand. So onward to the next tutorial.
We've got a maneuver plan that intercepts the Mun. Now we just need to execute that maneuver and fly to the Mun ourselves.
Okay. Now the question is, did it keep the maneuver I wound up with at the end, or did it do its own? I bet it did its own. Enter map view.
Whenever we have a maneuver plan, a burn timer will appear. The timer shows you how much time is left until we need to execute the maneuver. I've paused the simulation for a moment, so this number won't count down quite yet.
So this is the maneuver they were guiding us to build, where they had the initial time they chose, and you burn, and we got an intercept, and we ended up in a slightly more energetic orbit. That's fine.
The timer also tells us how long we'll need to burn our engines at 100% throttle in order to complete the maneuver.
Okay. So 842 meters per second delta V, and it's saying 46 seconds for the burn. That's pretty typical.
Now let's take a look at the nav ball. A new marker has joined our old prograde and retrograde markers. This is called a maneuver marker, and it shows us the orientation of our planned maneuver. We'll want to make sure that this marker is in the center of our nav ball during our maneuver burn. Luckily, we can aim at this maneuver marker by selecting the maneuver button on your SAS controls. Now your vehicle is properly oriented. And through the magic of SAS and more math than I'd like to admit, our vessel is properly oriented. We're still far from our planned burn, so let's speed things up.
Yeah, they're not kidding about the math. Anyway, good thing we have the SAS available. When we start playing campaigns and career modes and science modes and whatever else they put in, it's likely that early on you'll have to basically hold your desired attitude by hand. And that could be kind of tricky.
While we could rely on our reflexes to time warp at the perfect moment, a less stressful alternative is warping to a specific point in our orbit. See this button? Select it to warp automatically to the moment before our maneuver begins.
Okay, so we're going to do that.
Departure burn, here we come. Great! We've exited just before our maneuver burn, and I've paused the simulation once more. After we select Continue, remember to wait until the countdown reaches 0. Then we'll go full throttle until our burn timer reaches 0. Then cut the throttle quickly to avoid overshooting our target.
The other way to do this is to start cutting the throttle when you're getting close to the target, and then feather your throttle based on how your trajectory is looking. If you just blindly say, I'm trying to burn for exactly this delta V vector, and there's any errors at all early on, you could end up very carefully burning to exactly the wrong vector.
Okay, get ready to hit the throttle.
And it will have a pole here, bloop, 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 bonk. So we've got several things telling us when to burn.
Watch the burn timer. We want to stop our burn once it reaches 0.
Ultimately, we want to slow down our burn as we get close to our desired trajectory and then stop it when we've got an acceptable trajectory. But I think what I'm going to do is follow their instructions here. So far, none of these tutorials have been very different. The only problem we've seen is the staging display stuff. So we're looking good. I'm betting there's going to be bleep, bloop, blorp. 3, 2, 1.
Everything's looking great. Cut the throttle. Great
Yeah,
work.
she
You've
had us cut the throttle a
successfully
second
executed a maneuver.
early.
And now we're on our way to the Mun.
She literally had us cut the throttle 1 second early. Look at the trajectory we ended up with. This is where she paused us so we could cut throttle. And the amber is the trajectory that was originally planned, which was another second of burn. Now, it seems to me like it's been 1, 2, and on 3 it was lighting them both. So it could be there's an interaction between the way the burn timer is counting down and the way the tutorial works. But in practice, I will be feathering the throttle at the end of the maneuver node to try to match the desired trajectory rather than to try to clear out the node itself. So what was the other one? I think it was the electrical charge.
It's going to take a while to reach the Mun, but don't let the weight fool you. We're now moving faster than any Kerbal has ever flown before. When we enter the Mun's sphere of influence, we'll be going way too fast for the Mun's gravity to capture our vehicle. To orbit the Mun, we'll need to burn retrograde once we're inside its SOI, or sphere of influence. This will slow us down enough to keep us from being whipped into interplanetary space.
Okay, so this is a capture burn.
Let's start by time warping until we're within the Mun's sphere of influence. That's the sphere within which the Mun is the primary gravitational influence on your vehicle. Let's get a little bolder with our time warp this time.
Okay, this is something that always makes me nervous because in KSP-1, trying to time warp to a SOI transition is problematic at best.
Farewell, Kerbin.
So
We'll miss you.
X. It could very well be that we automatically drop out of warp when we change SOI. If so, hallelujah.
Welcome to the Mun's sphere of influence. Let's slow down to normal time so we can create our capture maneuver.
So it's not automatic. Except
Did you
in the
notice that
tutorial.
we've got a periapsis above the Mun, but no apoapsis? That's because we're going too fast to complete an orbit before sailing past the Mun. Don't worry, we have time to adjust. Our objective is to slow down enough so that both apoapsis and periapsis are within the Mun's sphere of influence.
This is a hyperbolic orbit, and if you look at the orbital parameters, you'll notice that the apoapsis is negative. The math happens to work out the same for most things. There's some of the formulas I use where a negative apoapsis will throw them into a tizzy and have them do exactly the wrong thing. But that's correct. This is a correct display.
Remember the rule of orbital opposites. Because we want to lower your apoapsis, we'll need to place our maneuver plan at the periapsis. Let's get started. In order to reduce our apoapsis, we need to slow down by burning backwards, or retrograde. This is a little like deorbiting over Kerbin, but we're going to stop burning before our trajectory meets Mun dust.
Okay, similar thing. ignore all of the things that are happening here as our orbit came back and hit us a second time. Keep going until it's inside. And I'm going to circularize.
Maneuver plan set. Next up, let's make sure we're pointed where we need to be.
So I like to do this until AP and PE are like that. So now we
If the maneuver is right and we're pointed in the right direction, now we need to time warp to the right position. And we're on our way. Almost there. When the countdown reaches 0, throttle up to start your capture burn.
And again, this is a case where I will start the burn at the right time, and I'll feather the end to get the trajectory I want, rather than to try to match the planned burn. Three, two, one.
Keep burning until the burn timer reaches 0.
Oops. And I hit it by mistake. There we go.
Shut the engines now. We have an fantastic. That was some fancy flying. Looks to me like you're about ready to try this for real.
Yeah, let me get this in a better orbit than you left us in, Paige. There you go. There's my orbit. Okay, end tutorial. So that's all of the tutorials. So the only problem we found there was a glitch in the staging stuff. I'm happy with that. So we are going to head out to KSC, and the next step is going to be to design a rocket to test out the fuel ducting and see if that's fixed. So we don't have any regressions in tutorials that are important. Okay. So I've stepped through all of Paige's stuff. Now we're going to just set us up with a basic rocket here. Let's see. Just out of pure, I always build my rockets this way. Even though we have no plans on doing orbiting in this guy or landing or anything, I am going to go ahead and put all that stuff on it. And we are going to do there. Let's get ourselves up a so how much DV does that have? So this claims that this little point thing, this would be my get us out of orbit. I'm going to do extra stages here because this is a staging test. This is going to be a general staging test vehicle if things work right. So I want to do a little bit extra up front. So this 350, 360-ish delta V should be enough to get us out of orbit, I hope, if I haven't bungled it. What if I use a Terrier instead? 320. Yeah, let's use this guy. This little guy probably, I'm thinking that once we put a decoupler on him, yeah, that's just wrong. There, use him. So now we can decouple. So this is the return stage. And now I want a stage that I can circularize in. I'm going to guess a little bit here and see what we come up with. fuel tank and an engine, and this is 1700. That is enough to do a whole lot of fun things on orbit with. How do I know whether that is... how do I know whether that is in atmosphere or at... Yeah, so I think there is a way to do this. I do not remember what it is, to select whether this delta V is showing me atmospheric at sea level or in vacuum. Well, experience tells me that this is quite a nice space stage. This is probably the vacuum delta V. If this is the sea level delta V, then vacuum delta V is much, much higher than I would expect. So we are going to move that up a bit. Give ourselves some room. So if this guy is what we want to have on orbit, and this can handle circularization, it means the next stage needs to handle the ascent. So I am going to put a coupler down there. It's a medium, small coupler, like that. And I'm going to overbuild the ascent stage, as usual for me, but I'm not going to overbuild it hideously. Well, maybe I won't overbuild it. Let's start off with just one of those. And this is going to be the upper. So this guy has 1500. So that's the last 1500 delta V to get us up into orbit. And now I want some liquid fuel boosters, which will be in an Asparagus configuration. We're going to need fuel lines. Methalox tanks. Gonna need him. So let's start by putting up our control surfaces. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 pairs, which means I want is for this guy to be like that. Okay. Coupling, we need radial couplers. And I need these to be 2 here. Like that. And let's see, fuel tanks. Now these guys, could just use swivels on them all. Not what I would normally do. Now I'm actually building this shorter than many of my test vehicles. I would put more fuel on. I would end up with a lower thrust to weight ratio. And I need a cap arrow. Okay, so there is my thingy. We're going to need another pair of those, but get the first ones out here. Let's see, go back to, I favorited these, so fuel. So these guys are going to push fuel into the center. All these engines are in the same stage. So all 3 engines fire until these tanks drain, and when I stage these, this middle guy should have all of his fuel. So I'm convinced that this is wrong. So this guy alone is 1355. We should have 1355 in whatever stage. Let's. What if we put these down below it, just to verify what's going on here? Okay, so if we fired the outer ones and then the inner ones, we would have it. And the delta V is incorrect. I have, oh, there we are. That kind of makes sense. This guy is 1355 delta V with this pushing this stack. So if I have two engines and I'm pushing the whole thing, it's close to the same thing. So now what I want to do is have this guy firing at the same time. But let's actually get the whole thing going before we start to asparagus it up. So this guy comes in here. Whoops. Like that. Now, we need to find out where these guys are. So here's our new engines. And here's our new. So this is what we would get if we just added a pair and then added a pair. What we want to do now is have all the engines in the same stage, like that. So they all start burning at once. And if we didn't have any cross-feed of fuel, they would all burn through all of their fuel at once. So now, these guys feed into the middle. And we'll notice that some, but not all, went up above. So I don't think that the fuel lines are at their desired effectiveness yet. And there is our complete asparagus configuration. I don't know what I have to do to get these to update. This could be correct. So now it's just a matter of the delta V numbers, possibly just the delta V numbers not updating properly. I thought these would be more similar to each other than they are. So it's not clear to me whether we are correct or not. But let's do a flight with these. Oh, I'm going to need a... Where'd the clamps go? Here they are. I am going to need clamps on this thing. And we are standing up very nice and tall, just really cool and everything, but not the best idea in the world. So there we have it. And I'm going to call this a onion 4. We're going to save it. And the vehicle name is onion 4. The workspace is going to be onion testing. And let us see if we can launch this thing. I forgot to check my staging on the launch clamps. Okay, so we need to revert to the VAB. I want to save this properly. I did a good job of checking my staging before I attached the clamps. Not so much testing it afterwards. So there we go. So stage 1 is the clamps and all the engines light up. And then we jettison the first pair, which is the ones that have the ducting to the second pair. Then we jettison the second pair, which has ducting to the middle. Right there. And then we jettison the lower half. And then we have our space engine and so on. Now, according to the engineer, well, I tend to run high thrust to weight ratios when I'm just tossing together rockets like this. So this is fine. 2.6. Okay. Interesting that it doesn't give us total delta V. Parts manager. Trip planner. There we go. This is a round trip to Mun. It's not really, but let's pretend. So Mun round trip says we would need 3,400 for low orbit, 860 to intercept, 280 to, yeah, okay. So this claims our launch vessel has a delta V of 4,928. That feels about right to me. Normally I would fly 6 of these instead of 4, which would give us almost 6,000 delta V. Need to pack a bit more. Yeah, this could not get us a round trip to Mun. Kerbal manager. So Bill is flying this one. Actually, let's put Valentina up in this one. There we go. So Val gets to fly this test flight. I'm going to hit the save button again. Onion 4. And we're going to launch. So what I want to do here is we are going to be testing this just to see what the fuel displays do as we go up, and specifically if I stage at the appropriate time. After I've staged, the remaining tanks should all be full. There's the sound. Okay. So SAS is set up to point us upwards. These look approximately right. Let's see how sharply I can stage at the right time. I think to test this, I am going to there we go. It works! They fixed the fuel ducts. Okay, and I was so focused on the engines I wasn't watching my guidance. But that's okay. So that looks good. And I now have a recording of how it behaves as it goes up, so we can use this later on to as comparison for watching for regressions in the fuel lines if we ever want to check that. Just for fun, let's do an actual launch. So I don't have any automation. I'm going to have to actually go install a new version of Kerbal Script control system, and I will have to tweak up my code for any changes that he's made. So this is going to be a manually flown launch here. So what I'm going to try to do is give myself about a 10 or 15 degree pitch over shortly after we get up above, and then just follow prograde and see what happens. And I'll use the throttle to get myself into an 80 kilometer orbit. Let's do this. Up. So let's do a pitch over. And a little bit more. There we go. We're burning prograde. We got ourselves into the gravity turn, and now we stage. This is going to be a very tall orbit. I could have pitched over a lot more. And because we have such a high thrust to weight ratio, we may end up in orbit sooner than I thought. Whoops, I did not mean to stage that yet. Yeah, piece of cake. I'm going to go back and I'm going to add 2 more stages to this, just because that will make this enough of a rocket that I can test the full 7 engine configuration, and maybe we can use that same configuration to get out to Mun. I'll put that on pause while I'm doing that tinkering. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, back out of pause. This is easier than I thought it was. I was able to peel off the first pair and move it off to the side a little bit and put in a second pair. And as I expected, doing a save and a reload of the workspace did refresh the delta V values. There is the effect I've seen here of as you add asparagus pairs, each one, you know, the ones above it stay the same. Each one gives you a little bit more delta V, not a lot more, just a little bit more. These are going to go down. You can, you know, pretty much use Tsiolkovsky to tell you what they are, but this does add almost 500 delta V more by adding another pair. So this total is pretty good. If I look at the trip planner, this brings our delta V up to 5,400 in the trip planner. I think that understates it anyway. So there is our configuration. This is substantially similar to the configurations I've used before. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to pop the tops off of these guys, and I'm going to add another fuel tank to them. Because our fuel to weight, our thrust to weight ratios are nice and high, which means we can carry more fuel. And as everybody knows, I love me some extra fuel. So, doing that, we ended up doing a whole lot more. I pull off an engine and put it back on. It recalculates, but not correctly. Okay, so let's make this the Asper 7 configuration. Here, save, and then I'm going to load it. This is 1300 and so on the way up. Okay, so adding these tanks in did something to this. I'm not sure what. I am going to rebuild this from scratch using the longer tanks. Hold on. Okay, sometime later, I have rebuilt this using this as the basic unit. So I've got a 400 and 800 tank in here, and I put them together first. I was having some trouble getting these little winglets. I wanted to use the symmetry mode for those. I couldn't figure out a way to build it over here and get these symmetric on the mirror symmetry and connect it, because when I did that, I ended up with the mirror symmetry pointed in the wrong direction. And I tinkered around with that for entirely too long. And I thought, well, it doesn't have to be exact, not for the test. So these guys have some aerodynamics set up so that when we decouple, they will naturally be pulled apart, because I don't trust that my explosive things will do it. I'm using these aerodynamic decouplers here because I thought they looked really cool. The fuel ducting, I did a long run from the bottom of the one to the top of the next one, so that it became really obvious. I could look at the arrows and see the arrows that's going from here to here. I wanted to be able to double check my arrows. So this pair going into this pair, which goes into this pair, and then this one, oh, there's no one here. You have to go inside and see that there's that guy there. Compounded a little bit by the fact that here's where the lower stage is. So the middle stage is not as tall as the outside guys. So, not the usual thing. I didn't extend the middle when I extended the outsides, but that's all right. Normally I would have put some separatrons on here so they nice and burst out, but that's okay. So this is all set. I have 7 engines. I have them set up to start, and those guys peel out, and then those guys peel out, and then those guys peel out. Bottom half, engine. Top half, engine, separate, and parachute. So this is my testing configuration. Previously, when I've built ships on this scale, they have had 6,000 or 7,000 meters per second. I'm not sure where that number is coming from. Surely there is a way for me to configure that to show some of these engines in their vacuum ISP. It's not even confirming to me whether it's vacuum or surface. It's just saying delta V. I'm sure there's a way. I remember seeing it, so I know there's a way to see it, but it just, I blew it somewhere. Anyway, so let's go see if we can launch this thing. Okay, so even though I have everything turned off, oh, I don't have everything turned off. I guess SAS initializes to on. Yeah, this is continually trying to point me upward. That's all right. We've got the tutorials. They're going to point us at all this stuff. Okay. As we go up, we should see the same as the last flight, where the first pair is going to head down towards zero faster than the other ones, and when we stage, it will come back up. I've got my fingers on the buttons to stage, so I will zero the throttle, then stage, and then bring the throttle back up. So it'll be really clear what's going on, and we can actually watch what's happening during that phase, if nothing else, by going back and reviewing the video. Let's go ahead and start. Oh, I'm getting my turn to happen before my first pair goes off is going to be the key thing here. Okay, so we want to peel over a little bit. Okay, and we are at a bit over 10 degrees. We're good. Now it's a matter of watching the engines. First pair away, and those are all full. Yay! Gravity turn looks good so far. This is getting very close to 80 kilometers. I'm not going to try to peel it right on, but I will hit the cutoff as it hits 80. There we go. So we have a lot of Delta V available to us now for circularization and messing around on orbit. We've got 634 left in this booster pair, another 1,300 in our ascent engine, 1,700 in our circularization engine, and then the 320 to get us back. So this configuration clearly could get us to MUN. And I think that the primary thing I wanted to prove today was that yes, indeed, the fixes have fixed the fuel ducting. So Asparagus staging is back. Yay! I'm going to terminate the recording here, and I can get back to fiddling around with Control System 2 and the 1202 code, and I will see you with a resurrection of my autopilot code with whatever changes happen to be needed by the new version. I don't know. He changes a lot of stuff. It's growing very fast, and I want to revisit all of my code from the ground up to get a feel for what is going on in his code and how I can take advantage of it. Looking forward to that. It may be a while before I get that recorded, but I will see you then.